as we're going through these slides and as we're going through the process, really notice and use your tools so that you can stay here in the present moment. Some of these things are a little bit activating, and it's possible that we might get kind of taken back into traumatic memory, which is fine, except that we want to be doing it from this base of the present moment. So to be keeping that in mind. So here's his website. If you get the Sunday class email from me, you get this as a PDF form as well, and you can link on those. One of the things that he talks about all the time is opening up our hearts, opening up space in our heart to enjoy meaning and joy, and how we can work with our past and grieve our past losses to open up that space for the present. So the nature of neglect and childhood developmental trauma is that our brain doesn't develop in the same way as if we had secure attachment. So if we have good enough parenting, which some of us had, it's on a continuum. Sometimes it was better than other times. I also think that as we're looking back from now in 2020 to 40 years ago or 60 years ago or 20 years ago, our culture and our society has changed a lot in terms of mental health and awareness and stigma and shame, and even just what we understand about trauma and developmental trauma. The ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, studies were only done in the mid to late 90s. So that's not that long ago. And then it takes time for those ideas and for those therapies to kind of work their way through into the general public. And somatic in our body treatments are only in the last 5 or 10 years really making their way into mainstream psychology and treatment as well. So there's a lot as we're working through this that wasn't understood when we were parents or when we were children. So just to keep that in mind. Whatever happens to us in childhood affects our developing brain, and it also, of course, then develops a certain way for survival instead of for connection. And it really affects us all through our whole life. And that's what we're looking at today. And Pete Walker talks about grief and grieving as a process of metabolizing and resolving what happened in childhood so that we can move forward from that in a more stable way. So he also has a caution. So if anyone who's here or listening, if you're finding that you're really triggered by this, or you're finding that you're really getting carried away into the past, one of the things that we can do, of course, is to stay here using the tools. A lot of them are on my emergency practices page. But also, to do some tapping, to hold our own hand, to do some breathing. But if it feels like it's not the right time for you to be doing this, you could also take a step back and go back and work a little bit more with the emotional flashbacks and the inner critic pieces that we did 2 weeks ago and last week. And if you find that you have that really strong inner critic response, especially that when you start into grieving or crying, you're really calling yourself names, then it might be a better idea to work with that first, or to not go too deeply into it as we're working with it today. So these are some ports I wanted to just have on here. And I don't mean to make this really scary either. I know that most of us here in the community class for sure have had a lot of experience using these tools and know a lot about our body. We've done a lot of this healing work already. And we can also always give ourselves that extra support of managing this in a way that's kind and supportive and where we're stable. All that work we've done with Deb Dana and Stephen Porges and the polyvagal system, it really points to how we need to be not in a fight, flight, or freeze response, but in ventral vagal as we're looking into these times from our childhood and earlier in our adult life when we felt overwhelmed and afraid. So be kind and gentle. So these are some of the things that he talks about. And when I was looking at this, it really struck me that this isn't something that was known in my family for sure by my parents. They provided a safe environment. I had secure, safe housing. I wasn't hurt physically. I wasn't yelled at or denigrated. And I know that that makes me very lucky many people and many people here have had that experience of not having a safe home environment to live in. And there are some other things that we need that go beyond just housing and food security and physical safety. So when we talk about, and Pete calls it the deadening absence of the nurturance that we needed to really thrive and really develop our whole brain, but also to develop as a human being who can function well as an adult. So we have physical needs for affection and protection. So I had them for protection, but not affection. The last time I remember being hugged, I was probably 2 or 3 years old, sitting on mom's lap reading books. But as soon as we got a little bit older, there was no hugs, there was no emotional connection either. So there was as I look back on that and I can see the times that, I can put that in the context of the 50s. And, depending on how old you are, what was going on in your parents' life. We've done some work too around intergenerational trauma. And the needs that we have go so much further than just physical safety. Emotional safety is so much affected by the emotional stability of parents and other people around us. And some people have a very strong sense of spiritual connection and depth. People go to church or have some other ways. They go hiking on the weekends, or there's some other ways that they connect on a deeper level. So if we have a way in our family origin to connect with our deeper self, that's really different than if our family is safe but not nurturing in that way, not deep in that way. Everything is kind of on the surface. And then we have these needs for being welcomed and having positive feedback and this different kinds of conversation that are deeper than just how was school today. We have to have that attuned empathy, as Gabor Mate talks about, where we feel seen and connected and like we really matter. And not just our kind of surface needs, but our deeper needs for someone knows me and thinks I'm okay. And that is something that even in a relatively safe environment, it didn't happen for a lot of people. So because there's so much variation in people's childhood experiences, and many people experienced what we would always recognize as abuse, and many people experience this kind of deadening absence of nurturance, either with abuse or on its own. It's good to understand that and kind of think about and sense into what was that like for you. Again, this abandoning happens for so many reasons. When I look back to my own, when I had my son at home, I was not very emotionally healthy. I was still very traumatized from my teen years, and I had him when I was 20. And I can look back now and see how I'm not happy with some of the parenting that happened, and it would happen very differently now. And yet, that was something that was just how it was back then. And so we can apply that to ourselves and perhaps to our parents. I don't think we're under any obligation to put our parents first. We're under, our priority should be our own healing. And if we're shaming ourselves in particular, that really gets in the way. So as we're doing these particular practices and inquiries, we're doing it from the perspective of our own childhood, ourselves as a child. And if other things come in, if there's shaming coming in around your parenting or something like that, see if you can move it to the side. The same as, we can have a lot of understanding about what was going on with our parents and compassion, but that's not really the point of the exercise here either. We're really looking at what was your situation as a child. So take some deep breaths and I'll just sit with this for a minute. You can close your eyes, or you could be journaling or just looking at the screen. My parents were not my allies. And that could be in a very obvious sense or more in that emotional, nurturing connection sense. My parents were not my allies. They didn't know me. They weren't on my side. They didn't have my back. Their parenting and lack of safe connection caused post traumatic stress for me. As we're saying these sentences, really feel into how does that feel for you? Does it feel true? Sometimes, even if it feels true, we might be kind of arguing or have resistance to that. So we're not looking for a particular experience. We're looking to see what's my response to that. My parents were not my allies. Their parenting and lack of safe connection with me caused post traumatic stress. And then my learned habit of automatic self abandonment is a reenactment of their failure to be there for me emotionally. We learn to abandon ourselves, and we don't learn to be there for ourselves in our family of origin based on what's going on with them. So let's kind of sink back into our own experience again and really remaining present. So we're going to look at some sentences here, and we have a lot of experience with and evidence for, and what some might say, stories about our experience. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. So just to see what it is that's coming up. And as we're looking at it, remain in the present moment. You can have your eyes open, anchor yourself into the safety of the room, take some deep breaths. This first element we're looking at is fear. I grieve that I felt afraid, and I still feel afraid. I could never relax and enjoy feeling safe. And now, as an adult, how does that show up in your life? And these are some examples. You wake up anxious, even though there's nothing scary about your day, you just have that feeling of dread. Sometimes it's not being able to get to sleep because your nervous system was conditioned as a child to be alert. And our social anxiety, which often comes from fear, limits our friendships. It limits the amount of fun we have. And we might get down on ourselves for that or just be kind of paralyzed not being able to do that. So take a moment to bring up something that's in your experience. How does that show up for you? If that's what you felt, if you had a lot of fear. And what are some of the ways that it's affected your life and still does, probably? It might be less than it used to be. Deep breaths. And if you're feeling kind of activated by this in your body right now, your nervous system, you could do some tapping. Notice your even breath, same length of inhale as exhale. Look around the room. Notice that you're safe. You're not in your childhood home anymore. You're in your adult life. And if there's feelings that come up about it, that's fine. There's energy in the body, just to notice that. So these inquiries are kind of meant to bring to our attention things we might go into more deeply. So if you want to stay with this one for a while, you could catch up with the others on the recording later. If something's coming up for you, you could stay with that. I grieve that I felt afraid and still do. And another element that is related to this is shame and unworthiness, our core deficiency beliefs, that feeling that there's something really wrong with us. And how does that show up in your life? We avoid people in situations where we're afraid we would be shamed. We have a highly developed sense of contempt, watching it for it in someone's face or in their voice. We're hyper vigilant for that. And so often, when we feel not lovable or not worthy, we get into relationships where we're treated like that. Notice your response and notice your body. If you're feeling shame, that kind of slumped over feeling of shame, bring yourself up, open your chest, open your eyes, look around, take some breaths, and offer yourself some kindness. Stay with this for a couple of minutes. How does this relate to your experience? Remain kind of as a witness, and you might have grief coming up and you might want to go into that. That's always fine as well. Really noticing, what does it feel like in my body? And then kind of let the story move a little bit to the background. Let the details be a little bit more in the background. Stay stable in this moment. Let yourself feel and breathe and stay here in this moment. And it might help to remind yourself that those are false. Core deficiency beliefs are false. They have a lot of intensity because they were very persistent and linked to danger. They're not true. In fact, you are worthy and you are lovable. Let that all just kind of sit for a moment more. Relax your body. And the other major kind of element of this is feeling dull and not fully alive. Disconnection, dissociation. And when we numb ourselves, it's for good reason. It's because the pain in our life is overwhelming and it's not something we can stay with. And then as an adult, we realize that a lot of times we just weren't there. And maybe we're still not. It numbs us to joy and pleasure as well. How did that show up? If that's something that you feel applies to you as a child and now, in what ways does that show up for you? It could be kind of a passivity, not really even thinking about what you want from life, just letting it happen to you. It could be a disconnection from people, social isolation, feeling like it's safer to stay home and watch other people's lives on movies or Netflix or something. As a child, I did a lot of reading. Could be those kinds of things as well. Stay with this for a little bit. How did disconnection play out in your life, and how does it still affect you now? And staying present in your body, staying present with kindness for yourself. You could hold your hand, feel the warmth of that. And in a moment, we're going to come back from the inquiry. So, this amount of time isn't enough time to really go deeply into all of these. It's more of an overview that could give you some ideas about what to go into later in more depth. But just as we bring ourselves back, one of your options would be to not do that, just to stay with whatever's happening with you, if there's one of the inquiries that you're really resonating with right now. Otherwise, bring yourself back and use a couple of the emergency practices, the grounding and orienting practices. So maybe we could all do that together. So a couple of deep double inhales. So deeply inhale, and then a bit more, and then long, slow exhale through the mouth. And just release everything out of your body. Let your mind clear. Deep inhale. And long, slow exhale. And then stand up for a moment and shake. And as you do that, start from your lower legs, your hips, your shoulders, your whole body shake for a moment. And shake it out. Shake it out of your body. Remind yourself as you look around that it's not permanently stuck in here. One thing you can do is hold your hands up in fists and then throw the energy down into the ground. Whew. Notice how it feels in your body. Notice how it feels to be alive. And then hold your hand or bring your hands to your heart. Offer yourself connection. And as we do that, we head into something and then we come back and we stabilize and then we open up to it again. We come back. We remember that in this moment we're safe. That's a good way to do it. It's a healthy way to go right in deeply and then know that we can come back out and connect again with our healthy adult self.